Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. This is Dr. Ed Park, and today we're going to be talking about menopause. The silhouette cartoon here shows that a woman is not happy with the Grim Reaper. And why is that? Because, in my opinion, 17 years OBGYN, I think menopause is a way that nature or our bodies take us out of the equation. And this woman apparently is not going quietly. The infographic above me, even though they misspelled the word symptoms, symptoms, the point is well taken. You get hot flashes, you get headaches, you get mood changes, and all these things that we want to preserve start to deteriorate. Your heart, your breasts, your vagina, teeth, the hair, the nails, the skin, and that is not good. Unlike andropause, which is a controversial, maybe not even a thing, male hormones gradually decline, but they don't turn off suddenly. Women will all go through this once they pass about 50. Estrogen deficiency, we know, is associated with mood changes. It can also be attributing, or it's also causing osteoporosis, poor skin elasticity, that means wrinkles, increased risk of cardiovascular disease because you get a more androgenic or male profile. And your sexual function, because of lubrication and also the sex hormones being absent or decreased, goes down, as well as the function of the sex organs. If you've had a vaginal delivery, then you have a tendency towards your bladder and your bowel side pouching into the vagina as well. By definition, if we lose ovulation before 40, that's called premature ovarian failure or premature menopause. There are a lot of reasons before menopause why you could stop bleeding. Those secondary amenorrhea reasons include um, hypogonadotropic. That means when you're stressed out or you lose a lot of weight, your pituitary shuts down. And you can also have rare problems with the uterus itself and bleeding. Everyone assumes, and at the end of the day, nobody knows what causes aging or menopause. There is a strong correlation with depletion of eggs, but everyone just assumes that the eggs only last so long in your ovarian fridge. We're going to challenge that a little bit. So, how many eggs do you have? Well, actually, when you were an embryo, you had the most that you were ever going to have in the millions. And then keep in mind, you only need 3 to 400 in a lifetime. That's how many get selected to ovulate to try and have that prize, the baby. When you're born, you might have, it says here, 290,000. At puberty, maybe 160,000, the graph above. At 25, maybe 65,000. At 35, 16,000. By the time you're 50, you may only have 1,000 left. But 1,000 is plenty to ovulate. You can ovulate 1,000 more times. So, what really causes menopause? Well, you see that the shape of the curve with its 95% confidence interval looks like a sigh, and the sigh is how the Grim Reaper takes us out. I thought that was a weird bit of echoing there. These days, if you're a high-powered MBA and you want to apply to Google, they'll throw in the cryopreservation package. What that means is, back when I was training, we didn't have the ability to freeze eggs. Now they do offer this. And what it entails is they'll hyperstimulate your ovaries, they'll take out an ovary and they'll freeze it. Now the thaw rates are about 80 90%. Um, ooh, let me turn that off. The take-home baby rate is maybe 30 to 60%, depending on how young and healthy you are at the time that you use your eggs. Cost of this anywhere from $9,000 to $20,000, and depending on if you do 1 to 3 cycles, you might get 3 to 20 eggs or so. Costs you $600 to store, but Eric Schmidt, or the current CEO, is going to pay for that, not you. So it's interesting that the eggs are the only stem cells in the body that don't replenish. Even in the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the lung, we have stem cells that are replenishing, but not so in the egg. So you're born with this cohort of eggs. For whatever reason, they dwindle, and it's a great mystery, actually. Uh, when I was studying this back in, well, I actually gave a presentation in fifth grade. My teacher, Dr. Kuna, didn't want to do it, so I did it. And I gave a lecture on the menstrual cycle, perhaps a harbinger of things to come. Here I am, uh, 40 something years later, well, fifth grade, 10 years, 43 years later, giving another lecture on menstruation. But since then, we've learned that there's something called anti-Müllerian hormone and inhibin B, which also feed back to the pituitary from the egg follicles and control that release of FSH. Basically, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to blow everything in 1 month trying to have a baby when you have, 300 other months to go to try and have a baby. at least from an evolutionary standpoint. When we look at menarche, which is the onset of menses, somewhere maybe 12, 13 years of age, to menopause, somewhere around 50, we see a gradual decline in the number of eggs reserved. So at birth, you have, again, maybe a million eggs. It goes down, 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 down. And by the time you're 30, you only have 10% of them left. And again, you don't need that many eggs to ovulate, but this is a truism or a fact of life. Um, a lot of women weren't aware of that. Now they are more aware of that. It's funny. I'm on Match.com. I see women in their 40s sometimes talking about having babies, and I think, maybe you don't know these curves. If you look at the curve, 50% is the middle of the curve going across. So at 31, 50% of women will start to have a drop off in their fecundity or the ability to have a baby. So it's best to have a baby before the age of 35. At 41, half the women are effectively sterile. They can't have a baby. By 46, half the women are having irregular periods. And by 51, half of them have stopped for at least a year. This is the definition of menopause. Of course, the take-home baby rate depends a bit on your health, and it depends a lot on the egg quality, really. All right, back to fifth grade. You probably tried to learn this. It's surprising as a OBGYN who happens to be male. I think that I never met actually a patient that wasn't a physician that understood the menstrual cycle. So it's just one of those things we accept, like the moon going around the earth and the earth going around the sun. Uh, Above me is a diagram of what's going on. So why do we bleed? Well, day zero is defined as the first day of the menstrual cycle. This is when your body gave up on having a baby last month and is trying again. So day 0 through 5 or so is you're shedding your endometrial lining, and day 4 through 14 you're building a new one. And so if you ovulate around day 14, then you're waiting for that fertilized egg to come. If the fertilized egg comes, it starts secreting its own progesterone. The uterine lining is rescued. You don't bleed. And you're pregnant. So let's look at the features of the menstrual cycle. Estrogen, which is created by these follicles in the ovary, feeds back and inhibits, along with anti-Mullerian hormone, inhibin B, the pituitary hypothalamic axis. It inhibits it so that you don't ovulate. I'm sorry, so that you don't have a lot of gonadotropins. The gonadotropins are the LH, FSH. When you do ovulate, there's what's happened is that one follicle has poisoned all her sisters. In other words, she gets so dominant that she puts out male hormones that poison the other ones. And that's a good thing because we don't want multiple gestations. After she ovulates, or he ovulates, or it ovulates, we have the corpus luteum, which is luteum for yellow. It produces a bunch of progesterone. It develops a secretory lining in the endometrium. It waits for that fertilized egg. And if it doesn't come, then the egg will die on its own clock, and that will cause the shedding of another menstrual cycle. So what we see here is that this is every month the body's trying to have a baby. Now the important curves are the ones in the middle. What you see is that FSH is inhibited, but then somewhere in the late follicular cycle, if there's a lot of estrogen, it'll surge the LH, and that will trigger the ovulation. But you do see in that yellow curve, the estrogen is going up, 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 up. Okay, what are the reasons for ovarian dysfunction? Well, a very common one in younger women, especially if they're heavy, but not always, can be called polycystic ovary syndrome. That's when the ovary is toxic. In other words, there's not one belle of the ball or prom queen every month. They're all poisoning each other. So no one actually dominates, no one ovulates. This can be related to insulin-like growth factors, can be related to obesity. It's basically associated with sometimes hirsutism, male secondary sex characteristics can cause irregular dysfunctional bleeding. Chromosome abnormalities such as Turner syndrome and Fragile X syndrome can also cause these problems. Thyroid and prolactin, either high or low thyroid or an elevated prolactin, are relatively common reasons for ovarian dysfunction. And very significant is, of course, emotional stress and drastic weight loss. The body doesn't want to have a baby, I presume, when it's stressed out or anorectic. And people under a certain BMI or body fat, they just cannot ovulate. But basically, Some people think, and most people agree, that a major part of menopause is you get a depletion of the ovaries. There's no more good eggs in there. So at birth, we saw again 1.5 million. Puberty, maybe a few hundred thousand. By the time you're 40, you have 40,000. I'm not going to say only 40,000. I mean, if you had 40,000 cars, you could get somewhere. But there is that. But there seems to be a clock somewhere else that's at work. Maybe in the hypothalamus, probably. That's the control center. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But an interesting thing is people with BRCA1 uh, or 2, they often are on contraception to prevent ovulation. The progestin inhibits the pituitary, and so you don't ovulate. So you're not even using the gas in your tank. It's somehow that you can't run the engine after 50. So it's not like these women who are on decades of ovulation suppression and presumably have a lot more preserved eggs from non-use. It's not like their menopause is any later. So there is some kind of clock either in the ovary, in the hypothalamic pituitary axis, or somewhere else that uh, doesn't buy you time if you stop ovulating when you're 21. So, what we do know is that the eggs that you are born with, that develop when you are an embryo, sit there in an arrested phase of development, prophase one, in meiosis one. Basically, they're just waiting, 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 and they wait for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to make a baby. But at the end of the day, we don't really understand what causes depletion. We presume it's a stochastic thing, meaning you get a bunch of recruitments, some poison, some die, but we don't really know. We do know that the rate of aneuploidy, or abnormal chromosome number, or in other words, the ability of that egg to finish its meiosis one and two and make healthy, normal uh, ootids or eggs, is impaired. So that's why people have to do the amnio or the blood tests now to test for Down syndrome. Because as those eggs have been in the fridge for 40, 50 years, you have a very high rate of abnormal chromosomes. There is an association with telomere shortening, but I don't think it's a primary mechanism, unlike um, in other organs. That's why the octagon does not make an appearance in this particular presentation. I think it's important to look at the ladies above. Consider the blonde to be the hypothalamus and pituitary. The hypothalamus really is the central control center. It controls the pituitary, as we'll see in a later slide. This chart above me says that if you're somewhere between less than 10 on day 3, remember you bleed day 0, you go and get a blood test, and you test your FSH level, it means that the ovary is working. The blonde does not have to shout. In other words, when the ovary is not working or deaf or dead, burnt out, then the blonde, the pituitary slash hypothalamus, has to yell. In a woman that is 60 years old, say if you check her day 3 FSH, it's going to be above 20 because the silly pituitary is still trying to have a baby at 60. So a hallmark of being menopausal, you just check the day 3 FSH. If it's above 20, you're in menopause. And this will become important later when we talk about the reason why we're doing this webinar. A patient of mine, Audrey, who started to menstruate at 73, and her level was below 10, which is quite remarkable. So what is a normal climacteric? Around 47 to 53, women will start to have shorter intervals. Instead of 28-day cycles, if that was regular for them, the quality of the eggs is poor, so the corpus luteum doesn't last as long. And so they might have a 24-day cycle. Then they start to skip cycles, maybe go 6, 8 weeks without a bleed, and then all of a sudden a bleed. It can be quite irritating and confusing. Associated with is hot flushing, which is you get hot and sweaty, your skin actually turns hot. This is thought to be an estrogen withdrawal phenomenon, sort of like a drug. And so, speaking of drugs, this cartoon above is kind of funny. It says, I don't think you understand how these hormones work. You're going to make me do something that will end up on the news. And so, of course, a lot of women, when they're menstruating, they have mood changes from the progesterone withdrawal, so-called PMS. But also, we have to have some sympathy for the women in their late 40s who are undergoing these radical changes in the hormones, because it can really affect your mood, your functioning mentally, and therefore your social interactions at a time when the kids are maybe hitting their puberty and the parents are getting ill. It's a very stressful time for women. Associated with this abnormal irregular bleeding is that or abnormal irregular ovulation is that you get strange bleeding. You get bleeding that is light and then heavy, that goes on and on and on, that comes out of nowhere. It's because you're not getting the organized growth of the uterine lining in the first 2 weeks, and then the organized shedding from that progesterone withdrawal right before your period. If you had come to see me during my 17 years of practice, I would have helped to manage you, usually with birth control pills. The reason we use birth control pills is that when you use hormone replacement, those doses are about um, maybe a third to a fourth as strong as the birth control pills. The birth control pills now are still, one fifth, one sixth what they were when they came into the market in the 60s. They were really bad. They gave terrible headaches. They were risky, clots. But you need the progestin to feed back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary to shut down that impetus to ovulate. So if we just gave you hormone replacement, it might be a bit of a struggle. If you would come to see me, 48, irregular bleeding, hot flashing, we would have just put you on birth control pills and you would have thought you were cycling normally. Um, Again, I would have regulated you with birth control pills because as long as you're not a smoker, heavy, hypertensive, or have a clotting disorder, it's probably not as risky, and it'll shut down your own axis, and you have a fake period for the next year. It'll come back in a year. We'll check your day 3 FSH. If that was over 20, we'd say, oh, there's not much gas left in the tank. Let's just go to the lower, presumably safer dose of hormone replacement. If you have been many years without bleeding and you start to bleed, that could be of concern. So we would do an endometrial biopsy. This is to rule out something called endometrial hyperplasia, which is overgrowth, or endometrial cancer. Now, very few people die of endometrial hyperplasia, which becomes endometrial cancer because it bleeds, it warns us. And so it's very easy to catch it in early stage before it's spread. Uh, Ultrasound is commonly done, but it's not specific. You need a tissue diagnosis. So the ultrasound might show a thickened endometrium in a 60-year-old. That's not good. They can put fluid in to get sonohysterogram, maybe a little helpful. They can also do a hysteroscopy where they look inside, do a scraping afterwards, and maybe if they see a polyp, they get it out. But most bleeding postmenopausally needs to be evaluated, and that's what I recommended Audrey do, as you'll see in the case later. Of course, if you're not heavy, if you're not at risk, it's very unlikely that postmenopausal bleeding is a problem. It's much more likely that it's caused by atrophy, actually, which is your vagina is bleeding because it's too thin. Anyway, the picture above me illustrates what an endometrial biopsy is. You put a cervical tenaculum on, straighten the uterus. You put a little tiny straw in there. It's a little uncomfortable. It feels like strong menstrual cramps, but people get through it. If they've had recent estrogen or if they've had a vaginal delivery, then it's not as hard. If they've never had that and they're 80 years old, never had a baby through the vagina, it can be painful, and they might need to go to the operating room for a dilation and a curettage. All right, let's talk about Audrey, which is a really fun case. Again, exosomes are not FDA approved to treat menopause. She's a 73-year-old doctor, 23 years postmenopausal, and back in March of 2020, she received her first IV exosome shot. She said she felt like a bubbling or tingling. It's interesting. My mom also said she felt a bubbling or tingling after her first exosome shot. I didn't measure progesterone level, but she thought she was ovulating at the age of 82, which is funny. Not funny, haha, but very odd, funny. Audrey, that is, experienced bleeding 2 weeks later. She thought this felt like a menstrual period. But of course, me as the board certified OBGYN, I said, well, you have to do endometrial biopsy to rule out hyperplasia. Eventually, after much nagging on my part, she did get that, and it showed a secretory endometrium, which means that the uterine lining has gone through the development of a follicular phase, and now it's in a secretory mode, which is basically impossible unless you've ovulated, which is remarkable. In addition, she did a day 12 FSH, which was extremely low. That's pretty much impossible if you're postmenopausal. And her estradiol was way at the top range of normal. Her estrogen level, she recalled it actually as lower because the 8 looks like a 3, I guess, but it was very, very high. Since then, she's gotten 5 additional treatments, 5 billion IV exosomes with 2 to 6 billion nasal exosomes. She loves it. She thinks it helps her memory, her reasoning, her color perception, her smell. And she says that her libido has increased. Interestingly, she referred me to some patients of hers, and there's three gals in their 70s, and they've all reported extremely high libido, which is interesting. And two of them have resumed menstruating, which is also interesting. Um, of course, the resumption of menses in an advanced woman of advanced age, I'm not talking about 50 something, but 70 something, is very unusual. It's not reported in the medical literature that I could find. It's not a thing. It goes against the central dogma of my profession, which is that life is a series of managing the recurring and accretive problems that we have. So, to take the common phrase that became a novel above, that's not a thing, again, what Audrey, what my mom, what these other gals in their 70s are reporting is not a thing. No one's ever started ovulating again. But I liken it to this. If you took a car out of storage and, you tried to run it, maybe there's a little gas in the tank. Maybe it'll run, even if it's old. So we don't really know what the heck's going on here. We can speculate, which is fun to do, but we have to presume that they're not confabulating and there's something going on here. This brings us towards the end of the lecture. You probably know who the guy with the mustache is because everyone likes to quote him, and it says right there. But last Thursday, when I was in LA, I did some karaoke with my good friend, and then I had to sign in around midnight to Korea. I gave a lecture to about 20 students in a technical institute there. A friend of mine, a colleague, asked me to do that because I had written a comic book about longevity. And I think the point that he started with is a good one, and that you hear it a lot these days. I hear it all on Facebook. Oh, believe the science. It's settled science. Science, science, science. The people saying that generally are not scientists. And because scientists understand that science is never settled, it's a constant revision, improving on models. The one where God created the world was improved by, Copernicus, and then the Newtonian model of gravity, and then other more subtle esoteric theories of gravitation with multi dimensions. It's always unresolved, but people like resolution. So Einstein said, allegedly, I don't know if this is a real quote, but it's good enough to quote here. Uh, After a certain high level of technical skill is achieved, science and art tend to coalesce in aesthetics, plasticity, and form. And the greatest scientists are always the greatest artists as well. This reminded me of the fact that I was talking with Alexei Alovnikov, this guy above, in and he wrote to me. He liked my book. This is the most recent one. He said, I don't agree with you. I don't think telomeres are the cause of aging. And so I can't really disagree with this guy. He's pretty smart. Like decades before the discovery of telomerase in the 80s, he inferred that there must be an enzyme to re-lengthen the telomeres. Otherwise, none of the system would work. So when Alexei Alovnikov tells you that you're wrong, you're probably wrong. Time to sit down. But it's not that the telomere theory hasn't been proven robust in explaining the phenotype of aging. It has. It has strong correlation. But what he's saying in a longer email to me was basically that this is not the central reason. So, like, if we go back to menopause, the ovaries are not the central reason. It's a huge part of it, it's a huge contributor. But there's something in the pituitary, probably in the hypothalamus itself, that is marking time, that is aging. So, the quote he said to me, I must say now that although the basic predictions of this telomere theory have been confirmed, human aging cannot be explained through telomere shortening. Aging, as I understand this process now, is caused by the work of a special clock in the brain, the so called chronograph. Chrono time graph writing. Okay, so where do we think about when we think about writing time? We think about a prisoner doing a tally of the days he's been in prison. And so I would never bet against Alexei. He inferred the telomerase enzyme. He inferred this crazy theory about ion storms or fountains from the nucleus that cause protein expression. His creative genius is beyond measure. So he hasn't found the way, but there must be a way that the cells in the hypothalamus are marking time. Some people think it's an epigenetic signature. That's a pretty broad, loose term. We know that in telomeres, there's uh, telomere associated RNA. So there are modifications that I don't think it's as simple as gene silencing. Some people think that microRNA or blocking RNA from the hypothalamus is what sends out the signal to tell everyone we're old. But Alexi's a smart guy and he comes up with brilliant theories. So the point is, something in the cells of the hypothalamus knows how old it is. Could be a gravitational meter, like every uh, time the moon gets full, it marks. But it could be something circadian. Every time you go through a day, you get a little older. But they know how old they are. And the other part of his theory is not mentioned here. It's printographs. It means that the stem cells in the other parts of the body also know how old they are by something called printograph. It's a total theoretical thing. But basically, he thinks that telomeres, although they have a strong correlation, are not causative. I want to close with the idea of eligiposis. And this is kind of a thing that we as residents thought was hilarious. We had a wonderful teacher, Joe Mortola, who taught us that, well, we need to memorize all the steroid pathways. He was truly fascinated with hormones. And so this is the culprit or the control center that we're talking about on the left. What we see here is that the hypothalamus, just means below the thalamus, is this area with these special neurons, and they talk to the left side posterior and the right side anterior pituitary. This is the central processing unit of everything. So the anterior pituitary makes the sex hormones. Also makes growth hormone, prolactin. It controls the blood pressure through ACTH, the adrenal cortex hormones. It controls the thyroid, which is the thermostat of the body, through thyroid stimulating hormone. In the posterior pituitary, we have antidiuretic hormone, which controls the fluid state, as well as oxytocin, that bonding love hormone that also controls lactation secretion and uterine contractions. So, what is eligiposis? Well, Joe, who is Italian American, thought it was hilarious that one of his teachers was saying eligiposis, and it was really LH pulses with an Italian accent. So, eligiposis is shown above me. Happens to be a mouse, but it could be a human as well. There's a cyclicity to the way that the pituitary and the hypothalamus work. They don't just excrete tonically LH. They come in waves, 30-minute waves in the mouse here, but it has to come pulsatile for everything to work. And when there's stress or dysfunction, there's something wrong with the music that you're playing. So something about the ability of the hypothalamus to create pulsatile uh, LH or LH pulses changes. We don't know why these cells in the hypothalamus are getting old or dysfunctional, but they stop learning how to sing properly. And also the audience in the brunette who is listening to the blonde shouting, the ovary that goes away as well. All right, so menopause is Mother Nature's way of getting you off the stage. So when I was in practice, I always said, well, at the end of my practice, I was faced with this women's health initiative research, and people got really spooked, and they thought, well, this is causing cancer. It's never that simple. But in general, the loss of estrogen deprivation, is a huge accelerant to aging and other illnesses that are very severe. And on balance, as long as you understand how to use the hormones, it's much better to have estrogen. If you have a uterus, you need some progestin as well to prevent unopposed estrogen and development of uterine cancer. But it's a huge, huge win for women that they can actually take something. Now they can take something bioidentical to slow down the progression of aging and illness. So, everybody, thank you for attending. Next week, we're going to talk about leaky gut, which is not even a real scientific thing. But again, Audrey and her friends menstruating and ovulating is not a thing, but we need to discuss it because it's impossible to say that they're lying, so there has to be an explanation. Um, the case, I think, next week is going to be very interesting. If you think that a picture is worth 1,000 words, this gentleman's face and appearance explain that there's something going on. And the only kind of rationale I could come from his symptoms that I could come to was something like leaky gut. So we'll talk about whether that's a real thing and what it means, what it comes from next week. I hope you can join or watch the replay. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. This is Dr. Ed Park finishing a lecture on menopause. And now, as we do, we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has questions, please feel free to type them. If you want to make a comment, you can do so by asking to be unmuted. I can unmute you as well. Oh wait, before we stop, sorry. Now I get to play Audrey's testimonial, which is really fun. So let me make sure I do this right. Share computer sound, optimize for sharing. Let's hear what Audrey has to say. Dr. Audrey Mickle, she stopped menstruating 23 years ago. Here we go. Hey, we're talking with Audrey Mickle. Tell us, Audrey, what age did you stop having menstrual cycles?
About age 50.
50. Okay. And so from that point on, you started taking what?
About that time, I started taking some estradiol and some progesterone.
Mhm.
Uh, 2 weeks out of the month for the progesterone cream only.
And was that enough to have you cycling, menstrual cycling?
No,
Okay.
there were
So,
no periods.
when did the exosomes, we started what, 6 months, 8 months ago?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And so since then, you've had about 6 periods.
Yes,
Now, initially,
like
we asked
clockwork.
you, what's that?
Like clockwork.
Yeah, so this kind of like the old days, same regimen of hormones, but now the everything is looking premenopausal for some reason.
Right.
And so I urged you to do an endometrial biopsy. You did. And what did that show?
It showed that there was a thickening of the endometrial lining,
Hmm.
but everything was fine.
No hyperplasia, no cancer.
No,
Okay. And so did they have an explanation for that or?
no.
Okay, so you didn't really tell them what you thought was going on.
No, I did not.
Okay, so the hormones that you're taking really shouldn't be enough to suppress your FSH. So you had a day 12 FSH of about 4.
4.
And what was your estradiol level? It was the same day? Day
They did.
12?
It was 535.
Yeah, so super high, like in the level of people getting fertility treatments, actually.
Or also someone in their early 30s or
Yeah.
20s.
Yeah, so you did a lot as a naturopathic doctor to optimize your nutrition
Right.
and health. It's funny, as we've collaborated to treat a couple of your other patients in their 70s are having menstruation.
Yes.
It's unusual. I know.
But they've had the exosome treatments.
Yeah, I know her period started after the exosomes. The other one had been cycling for a while on just.
Well, not like she is now.
Okay, so she had enough endometrial lining from just the hormones she was
Right.
taking to menstruate. But you think it's been different since the
I have.
exosomes? Yeah, I know they were all reporting increased libido, which was really
Absolutely.
funny. So that's well, good. Okay, so it's your opinion that you are ovulating, and
I can actually
yeah,
feel ovulation on about day 12. There's this tingling sensation that occurs in both ovaries.
huh.
Actually, yeah, they go back and forth.
Yeah. Usually the middle schmerz or the middle
Yeah.
pain is described that way as like a kind of like a bubbling, and then you can even get a sudden rupture.
It feels like it feels
Sharp
like a
pain.
tingling
Yeah.
sensation.
Huh.
But I definitely feel it right where the ovaries are anatomically, and it doesn't last for very long.
Hmm.
But it may tingle for several hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So the normal PMS, the melimina, 2 or 3 days before you're bleeding. So we're talking not the weird bleeding where it's light. It starts off crampy and heavy, like a regular period.
It starts off the first day is a bit medium,
Mm-hmm.
then 2 days heavy, and then it lightens up.
And do you get that sort of moodiness or breast tenderness 2 or 3 days
No.
before? No PMS
No
symptoms?
PMS symptoms.
Okay, yeah. All right, well, that's interesting. We'll keep monitoring that, but at least we know it's not cancer or
No.
anything like that. But you weren't too worried about that at
I
the
wasn't,
beginning.
not at all. Because I have a very good lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, Audrey.
Okay.
Bye. Okay, well, that's what I want to share with you. Extraordinary case. So why is that happening? I don't know. Maybe something in her hypothalamus got reset, renovated. Her pituitary. I mean, she probably still only has about 1,000 eggs, but that's enough to have 6 periods apparently. So anyway, if anybody has any questions, please let me know, and I will try to answer them while we're still online. Anyone? I don't know if you can see me. Can Can anybody see me right now? I turned off my screen sharing, so I don't know what you're actually seeing. Oh, Sarah, you can see me? Great. Thank you so much. Did the gals do the exosomes for the purposes of me menstruating? No, they just did it for a rejuvenation, for general health. Yeah. One of them, doesn't have a uterus. She had a terrible accident at age 20, uh, which is unrelated to her terrible ovarian cancer, age 19. So her libido went up, but of course she's not going to be menstruating. Yeah. So, but that was funny about my mom. I just thought, Mama, you're ovulating. And she goes, "Nah, it feels like I'm ovulating. There's a twinge here on this side. I remember." So, I don't know what's going on there, to be honest. But again, like I said, if you do a literature search on resuming menstruation in your 70s, there's nothing. So people don't like to talk about it, or it doesn't happen. As I was doing TA65 and cycloestradiol, some people did start menstruating in their 60s or 70s, but it wasn't much. There wasn't much gas left in the tank. But some would start cycling. And I even did a webinar about a 40-something-year-old lady that had kids when she was like 43 and then 46. So be careful what you wish for. Um, Someone asks, Sarah asks, have you had significant improvements in skin turgidity when taking the injections, and how soon after taking them? I have to say, yeah, I was having some neck sagging, and I recently took 5 billion, another 5 billion exosomes. It seems to tighten things up, maybe as a temporary thing, but I think the key to exosomes is repeating them. I mean, there's a benefit, then keep on doing it. Uh, you're actually you're gaining some ground, and you're repairing some stuff. A lot of people just have the endpoint. Well, I just don't want any pain in my knee. But if you're really a believer and you want to get ahead, you have to keep on building it up past to where you don't feel pain, I think. Colleen asks if someone had a lot of stress, would the IV exosomes help, especially with sleep? Uh, Sometimes they do. Most people do feel more grounded. It depends on whether your functional thought processes are creating the stress, as is usually the case with humans. Humans are very bad at being present in the moment, grateful, relaxed. So most of our problems occur from not spending time in the present. Anxiety is uncertainty about the future. Your thoughts are in the future, and depression is thoughts about the past. But yeah, I think it does make a lot of people feel more grounded, at least for a short time. Good question. All right, we got Carolyn, Dr. Montelago, or Dora Montelago, Linda, Sarah. Are there two Lindas, or is Linda on twice? Which Linda is this? Oh, so I can't see myself. I'm assuming that you guys can see me. So I better not do anything too overtly disgusting. Um, all right, that was fun. Talked about menopause. Menopause is a horror show, and it's very bad. I have a lot of empathy for women going through it. Um, I mean, people like to think, well, it's natural. A lot of things are natural. The syphilis and hurricanes are natural. I don't think that's a strong criterion for welcoming menopause and all its attendant unpleasantness and health risks. Yuki, any other questions? La 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 la. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Il y a des questions. Hay preguntas? Me parece que no. Does anybody want to comment about their menopause? All right. I think one of our friends on the call here, she had been on estrogen, and we talked about when we first met that when her doctor retired, somehow the communication was lost and they didn't continue the estrogen part of her regimen. So for 8 years or so, she was just taking the progestin. Progestins tend to be androgenic, and an androgenic profile is not as protective for the woman's heart and for her bone producing cells. So that may have contributed to deterioration in her tissue quality as well. And so we're trying to work through that. Um, Colleen asks, what's the best modality, IV or nasal for stress? I would say probably nasal. Um, just goes directly into the brain. I know I was with my mom a couple of days ago. It was her birthday, 3 days ago, and um, she is doing pretty good. Her mood is good. She's strong. Her brain is sharp. And I do get that a lot. I was talking to Audrey yesterday, and she said her brain is just very sharp. Um, for some people like myself, I'm afraid of taking IV because my brain is already spending too much time here, there, and everywhere, and I actually don't like it. If if change drops from the counter onto the floor, my brain is like in bullet time calculating how it's going to spin. It's really unpleasant, and all the memories I have are still very strong. Um, so but for a lot of people, maybe with advanced disease, Alzheimer's, it might be a good thing. We have to see how that works out. I had a really gratifying experience last Thursday. The night I gave the lecture, I'd actually been to a woman's house, 50 years old, and her husband wanted her to try exosomes. Their good friend had had some improvement in his blood pressure and his peripheral vision returned after a stroke. So this 50-year-old woman got IV exosomes, also intrathecal or spinal exosomes, because I wanted to get as much exosomes into her central nervous system from above and below. It was so gratifying to go back the next day because she said she was in a wheelchair, unable to move her arm at all. And the next morning, she was doing this with glee and standing up. She could stand, but only with weight bearing on one side. She was using both legs to weight bear. And then a day after that, she said she could move her ankle up and down, which was new. She could also feel sensations of pain and touch and position, pressure, which is really remarkable. So you have to presume that a person like that or a person like Audrey is not confabulating. Like they have no impetus to pay thousands of dollars to get an exosome treatment and pretend that it works. And how could they even do that? I mean, I have to presume that she didn't fake a stroke, and it's not like we're in some mega church and the pastor is telling her to come to Jesus. I mean, she genuinely was happy that she's able to move and recover some function. So there's some physiologic going on there, and I'm just out here trying to figure out what it is. And if you'll see, I'm never trying to oversell this, but I mean there are changes, and I think when you look at it from the perspective of what is there that can really reverse damage that is accrued, either from a stroke or Alzheimer's or from osteoarthritis, there's nothing really. So if this is something that's working, um, it's something that we need to embrace. Any other questions? Walid, assalamu alaikum. Okay, so we're having fun here. Next week we'll talk about leaky gut. I mean, there's some, speaking of confabulation, the pictures this gentleman sent to me, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's gotta be photoshopped or face-tuned. But his face went through such a rat. He looked 20 years younger. And I'm thinking like, okay, all the time, and I did this with the TA65, I have to think, are these people lying? Are they trying to con me? I'm thinking, wait a second, they paid me for this. You know, they have no reason to lie, I don't think. Like and so it's really a privilege and a pleasure to serve people and hopefully help them improve because we're breaking new ground here. Again, these things are not recognized by medical science because the dogma of my profession is that everything just gets worse, nothing you can do. So we're somehow these little cases, although they're not scientific evidence, they are very, very interesting indeed. Okay, no more questions. So it turned out we just had a couple people here that joined in, so I'm happy you did. Hopefully you can join in next week. Every week, as long as I can, I will continue to do these little chats. Okay, call me later, Colleen. Okay, thanks. Bye. Let me end the